The folder on the desk was marked classified, but the blood on the floor was public record. In the quiet suburb of Oak Creek, local police thought they had found an easy target, a quiet black business owner with a safe full of cash and no connections. They kicked down his door, humiliated him, and stole his life savings under the guise of civil forfeiture. They thought he was nobody. They were wrong. They didn't rob a helpless civilian. They robbed a retired Delta Force commander who had dismantled cartels with less effort than it took them to write a speeding ticket. When the system failed to give him justice, he activated a different kind of protocol. This isn't just a story about corruption. It is a lesson in why you never, ever poke a sleeping bear. The sign above the warehouse door read, Bishop Logistics, painted in unassuming navy blue letters. It was located in an industrial park just outside of Atlanta, a place where trucks rumbled by at all hours, and the smell of diesel hung heavy in the humid air. Inside, David Bishop sat behind a metal desk that looked like it had survived a war, which was fitting because so had he. David was 52, though he moved with the fluid economized grace of a man half his age. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped graying hair and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. To the locals he was just Dave, the guy who fixed supply chain issues for small businesses and kept to himself. He drove a 10-year-old Ford F-150 and paid his taxes a week early. On this particular Tuesday, the serenity of Bishop Logistics was shattered, not by the rumble of a semi-truck, but by the screech of tires and the heavy thud of a battering ram hitting the reinforced front door. Glass shattered. Shouts erupted. "Police search warrant, get on the ground now!" David didn't flinch. He didn't reach for the drawer on his right where a Glock 19 sat loaded. He simply exhaled, placed his pen down on the ledger he was reviewing, and slowly raised his hands, lacing his fingers behind his head. He knew the drill. Panic was for amateurs. Compliance was the first step of survival in a hostile environment. 3 uniformed officers and 1 detective in plain clothes stormed the office. The detective, a man named Sergeant Frank O'Connell, looked like he had been carved out of sour dough, puffy, red-faced and sweating despite the air conditioning. He wore a cheap suit that strained at the buttons. Flanking him were officers Gary Miller and Paulson younger men, with hands hovering too close to their triggers, adrenaline making them twitchy. "I said, get on the ground, dirtbag!" Miller screamed, rushing forward to kick the legs of David's chair. David didn't resist. He allowed the momentum to take him to the floor, cushioning his fall with a practiced roll of his shoulder, keeping his hands visible. "My name is David Bishop. I am the owner of this establishment. You are making a mistake." "Shut up!" O'Connell barked, stepping over David. "We got a tip, Bishop. Large-scale distribution, narcotics, money laundering. Don't play innocent with me." "Check the warrant," David said, his voice terrifyingly level. "And check your intel. I run a logistics firm." "Yeah, we know what you run," O'Connell sneered. He began ripping drawers out of the filing cabinets, dumping years of tax records onto the floor. "Tear this place apart, boys. Find the stash." For the next hour, David lay on the cold, concrete zip-tied watching as the officers dismantled his livelihood. They slashed open boxes of electronics, destined for a local school district. They smashed computer monitors. It wasn't a search. It was a demolition. Then they found the safe. It was a heavy-duty floor safe in the back corner. "Open it!" O'Connell demanded, hauling David up by his collar. "That safe contains payroll for my employees and cash for a charity auction this weekend," David stated calmly. $75,000. Every cent is documented. "Open it or I charge you with obstruction and resisting." O'Connell threatened his spit landing on David's cheek. David punched in the code. The heavy door swung open. Inside, neatly stacked bands of $100 bills sat alongside a few leather-bound folders. O'Connell's eyes widened. A greedy grin spread across his face. Jackpot. Look at this, boys. Drug money. That is legal tender, David said. I have the withdrawal slips from the bank right there in the save it for the judge. O'Connell interrupted. He grabbed a canvas bag from Officer Miller and started shoveling the cash inside. We're seizing this under civil asset forfeiture. Suspected proceeds of illegal activity. You're stealing, David said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You are taking money meant for working families. O'Connell laughed a harsh, grating sound. He leaned in, close his face, inches from David's. I'm the law bishop. I can do whatever the hell I want. You want this money back. You can sue us. Maybe you'll see it in 5 years. Until then, it's evidence. He zipped the bag shut. He didn't bag it as evidence properly. He didn't tag it. He just slung it over his shoulder. As they prepared to leave, Officer Miller noticed a small, worn leather case in the back of the safe. He reached for it. Don't touch that, David said. It was the first time his voice held an edge of command. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. Miller paused, looking at O'Connell. O'Connell scoffed. Grab it. Probably his stash of contacts. Miller grabbed the case and tossed it to O'Connell. The detective didn't open it. He just added it to the bag of cash. You have no idea what you have just done, David said softly, as they cut the zip ties, leaving him amidst the wreckage of his office. O'Connell turned at the door, smirking. I just cleaned up the streets. Have a nice day, Mr. Bishop. The door slammed shut. The cruisers peeled away, leaving silence in their wake. David stood up slowly. He brushed the dust off his slacks. He didn't call 911. He didn't call a local lawyer. He walked over to the landline. His cell phone had been smashed by Miller and dialed a number that hadn't been active for 6 years. It was a number that didn't go to a switchboard, but to a secure line in Northern Virginia. He waited for the click. Identify, a robotic voice said. Sierra 1, actual. Authentication code Broken Arrow. November. Golf. 4. A pause. Then a human voice, breathless and shocked, came on the line. Colonel Bishop, my God, sir. We thought you were completely retired. I was, David said, staring at the empty space where his safe used to be. But I have a situation in Atlanta. I need a cleaning crew and get General Banks on the line, now. 3 hours later, the atmosphere in the back room of O'Leary's, a dive bar, frequented by the darker elements of the local precinct, was jubilant. Sergeant Frank O'Connell ordered another round of shots for Miller and Paulson. To the biggest bust of the year, O'Connell roared, slamming his glass down. Miller wiped beer foam from his lip, looking a little nervous. Sarge, that guy. Bishop. He was weird, right? Didn't yell, didn't cry. Just stared. He knew he was caught. O'Connell dismissed, waving a hand. Guys like that, they play tough. But without his cash, he's nothing. We bleed him dry in court. He settles the department, keeps 80%, and we get our cut for the overtime. It was a scam they had run a dozen times. Target minority business owners who dealt in cash, seize the assets, and rely on the fact that fighting the seizure cost more than the money was worth. It was predatory, illegal, and extremely profitable. What about that leather case? Paulson asked. You never opened it. O'Connell reached into his duffel bag, which sat by his feet, and pulled out the worn leather folio David had warned them about. Let's see what kind of little black book our drug lord keeps. He unzipped the case. Inside there was no drug ledger. There were no contacts for cartels. Instead, there was a stack of photos, a heavy bronze medal, and a single laminated ID card. O'Connell picked up the medal. It was a 5-pointed star hanging from a blue ribbon. What is this, some kind of Boy Scout badge? Miller leaned in his face, draining of color. Sarge, that's a Medal of Honor. The bar noise seemed to fade away. Bullshit, O'Connell said, but his hand trembled slightly. He dropped the medal and picked up the ID card. It wasn't a driver's license. It was white with a holographic overlay and a black magnetic strip. It read, Department of Defense. Level 5. Clearance Colonel, David J. Bishop, Commander, Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, Task Force, Delta Status, Inactive/Reserve. Underneath the ID was a photo. It showed a younger David Bishop dressed in desert camouflage, shaking hands with the President of the United States in the Oval Office. O'Connell felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He dug deeper into the folio. There was a letter yellowed with age on White House stationery. To Colonel Bishop for your actions in the redacted operation on July 14th, the free world owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. Your ghost status is confirmed. You are untouchable. Signed, the President. Sarge. Miller whispered, his voice cracking. Who the hell did we just rob? O'Connell slammed the folio shut. It's fake. It's got to be fake. A guy like that doesn't run a warehouse in Atlanta. He warned us, Paulson said, standing up, knocking his stool over. He said we were making a mistake. He didn't say it like a threat, Frank. He said it like a fact. Sit down, O'Connell hissed. Nobody panics. We are the police. He's a civilian. Even if he was some army guy, he's retired. He has no power here. Suddenly, the TV mounted in the corner of the bar flickered. The local news channel cut out, replaced by static, and then a blue screen. Miller's phone buzzed, then Paulson's. Then every phone in the bar started ringing simultaneously. O'Connell looked at his own phone. It was a text message. Unknown number. The message was simple. Return the package. You have 30 minutes. Run. What is this? O'Connell yelled, looking around the bar. The bartender was staring at his own phone in horror. Outside, the distinct thwop-thwop-thwop of helicopter blades began to vibrate the windows. It wasn't the police chopper. The sound was heavier, deeper, the sound of military-grade Black Hawks. O'Connell ran to the window. Through the grime of the glass, he saw black SUVs swarming the street outside the bar. No sirens, no lights. Just matte black vehicles boxing in the exits. Miller, call the captain, O'Connell screamed. Tell him we're under attack, Miller dialed, shaking. It says, line disconnected. Sarge, I have no signal. The front door of the bar didn't open. It was kicked in, much like David Bishop's door had been hours earlier. But the men who entered weren't wearing ill-fitting police uniforms. They wore tactical gear with no insignia balaclavas and carried suppressed rifles held at the low ready. The lead operator stepped forward. He didn't shout. He spoke with the terrifying calm of a man who killed for a living. Frank O'Connell, the operator said, you represent a biohazard to the Constitution. We are the cure. Let's rewind 2 hours. While O'Connell was drinking whiskey, David Bishop was sitting in his ruined office, holding a secure satellite phone. Arthur, David said, I don't want them killed. Not yet. That's too easy. On the other end of the line, seated in a high-rise office in Arlington, Virginia, was General Arthur Banks, retired, now a private contractor for the Pentagon and one of the most powerful men in the defense sector. He and David had crawled through mud together in Panama and hunted warlords in Mogadishu. David, they raided a federal asset, Arthur said, his voice tight with controlled rage. That money wasn't just payroll. That safe contained the crypto keys for the Atlantic relay station you were holding for us. If they compromise those keys... They won't, David said. They are greedy, not smart. They took the cash and the folio. They think they scored a drug bust. I can have a team sanitize the entire precinct in an hour, Arthur offered. It wasn't hyperbole. No, David said, leaning back in his chair. I live here, Arthur. I employ people here. If we turn this into a war zone, my people suffer. I want to dismantle them. I want to strip them of everything they think protects them. They hid behind a badge to rob me. I want to show the world what they are. Psychological operations? Arthur asked. Full spectrum dominance, David corrected. Financial, social, legal. And then, physical. Understood, Arthur said. I'm activating the Ghost Protocol. I'm freezing their assets as we speak. I'm flagging their passports. I'm pulling their digital history, every email, every dirty text, every bribe they ever took. By tomorrow morning, they won't be able to buy a pack of gum. Good. What about the chain of command? The chief of police there, Robert Halloway. Arthur said, the sound of typing clicking furiously in the background. Looks like he's on the take too. He signed off on the warrant. We'll add him to the list. Start with the seizures, David ordered. I want them to feel what it's like to have their lives stolen. Back at O'Leary's bar, the situation had de-escalated from raid to hostile detention. The tactical team had not killed the officers. Instead, they had zip-tied O'Connell, Miller, and Paulson and lined them up against the bar exactly as the officers had done to David. The lead operator, a giant of a man, reached into O'Connell's bag and retrieved the leather folio and the cash. He counted the bands of money with blinding speed. It's all here, the operator said into his headset. Asset secured. He looked down at O'Connell, who was sweating through his suit. You are lucky, Sergeant. The Colonel wants you to live. For now. Who are you? O'Connell stammered. I'm a police officer. You can't do this. The operator leaned in. You ceased being a police officer the moment you robbed a Tier 1 operator. Now you're just a target. The team moved out as quickly as they had arrived, disappearing into the black SUVs. They left the officers bound on the floor, the bar patrons staring in stunned silence. O'Connell struggled against the zip ties. Miller, get a knife. Cut me loose. It took them 10 minutes to get free. O'Connell, humiliated and furious, stormed out to his cruiser. I'm calling the chief. We are going to arrest Bishop. I don't care if he's Rambo. He just assaulted police officers. He tried to start his cruiser. The engine clicked but didn't turn over. The dashboard remained dark. Battery? Miller asked. It's a brand new car, O'Connell yelled. He tried his personal cell phone again. Still no service. He looked across the street. A digital billboard that usually displayed ads for personal injury lawyers flickered. The image changed. It was a photo of Frank O'Connell. But it wasn't his police portrait. It was a grainy photo taken from a hidden camera showing O'Connell accepting an envelope of cash from a known drug dealer 6 months prior. The text underneath read, Sergeant Frank O'Connell, corrupt, thief, traitor. O'Connell's jaw dropped. Miller pointed to another billboard down the block. It showed Miller's face alongside a chat log of him using racial slurs in a private group chat. Officer Gary Miller, racist, perjurer. What is happening? Miller cried, panic rising in his voice. O'Connell felt a vibration in his pocket. It wasn't his phone that was dead. It was the police radio on his belt. But it wasn't the dispatcher. Hello, Frank. David Bishop's voice came through the radio, crystal clear. O'Connell grabbed the radio. Bishop, you're dead. I'll kill you for this. You have no car, David said calmly. You have no money. I just drained your bank accounts, civil forfeiture, Frank. I suspected they were proceeds of illegal activity. You have no reputation. Every news outlet in the state just received your full unredacted internal affairs file. And Frank? What? O'Connell screamed. I'm coming for the badge next. The radio clicked off. O'Connell looked around. People on the street were stopping. They were looking at the billboards, then looking at the cops. Phone cameras were coming out. The barrier of fear that O'Connell had used to control his beat was evaporating. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the prey. The walk back to the precinct was a 3-mile hike through a purgatory of their own making. Frank O'Connell, Gary Miller, and the young officer Paulson had no vehicle, no working phones, and no dignity. Every 100 yards, a digital billboard or a smart bus stop display flashed their crimes to the public. It wasn't just the corruption. It was the humiliating details. Photos of O'Connell cheating on his wife at a motel. Transcripts of Miller bragging about planting evidence. It was a digital strip search. By the time they reached the Oak Creek Police Department, a crowd had already gathered. It wasn't a protest. It was a spectacle. People were live streaming. They were laughing. The fear that the uniform used to command was gone, replaced by mocking contempt. O'Connell pushed through the crowd, shielding his face, and burst into the station lobby. "Get these people out of here!" he screamed at the desk sergeant. The sergeant, a veteran named Billings, didn't move. He just stared at O'Connell with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Frank, you need to go to the chief's office. Now." "I need a squad car." O'Connell yelled, his face purple. "I need a SWAT team. David Bishop hacked the city infrastructure." Frank Billings said louder this time. "Shut up. The feds are here." O'Connell froze. The air in the station was stale, heavy with the scent of burnt coffee and panic. He looked toward the glass-walled office of Chief Robert Halloway. Inside, Halloway was standing behind his desk, looking small. 2 men in charcoal suits were sitting opposite him. They weren't FBI. They didn't have the bureaucratic slouch of the bureau. They sat with spines of steel. O'Connell opened the door. "Chief, we have a situation." Halloway looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. "Situation? You moron. You didn't tell me he was JSOC. You said he was a logistics guy with a record." "He is." O'Connell defended himself. "The record is fake. It's all fake." One of the men in the charcoal suits stood up. He was lean, holding a briefcase. "Sergeant O'Connell, I am Special Agent Reynolds, Department of Defense Inspector General's office. Sit down." "I don't answer to the DOD," O'Connell spat. "I'm a civilian officer." "Technically," Reynolds said, opening a file, "you are currently an enemy combatant." The room went silent. "Excuse me." O'Connell laughed nervously. "The money you seized." Reynolds continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "You claimed it was drug proceeds. That cash was serialized currency, allocated for Operation Ironclad, a classified counter-terrorism initiative. By seizing it, and failing to log it into federal evidence immediately, you committed an act of theft against the United States government involving sensitive national security assets." "It was in a safe in a warehouse," Miller cried from the doorway. "That warehouse," Reynolds said, turning his cold gaze to the junior officer, "is a CIA cutout station. It is sovereign U.S. military soil. You didn't raid a business. You invaded a military installation." Halloway slammed his hand on the desk. "This is entrapment. How are we supposed to know?" "You weren't," Reynolds said. "That's the point of a cutout. But you didn't follow procedure, did you? Chief, you didn't call the DA before the raid. You didn't verify the warrant with the state attorney. You rubber-stamped a shakedown because you wanted a cut of the seizure." Reynolds tapped a key on his laptop. The large monitor on Halloway's wall flickered to life. It showed a bank account in the Cayman Islands. "Robert Halloway," Reynolds read. "Balance $1.4 million. Funneled from civil asset forfeiture funds over the last 5 years." The screen blinked. The balance dropped to $0. "Hey!" Holloway shouted. "You can't do that." "I didn't," Reynolds said. "We just froze the assets pending a terrorism financing investigation. Under the Patriot Act, we don't need a judge, we just need suspicion. And considering you robbed a Delta Force commander, we have plenty of suspicion." Reynolds looked at O'Connell. "Yours is gone too, Frank. The pension, the savings, the college fund for your daughter, all of it. Seized." "You can't touch my family." O'Connell lunged forward. The second suit, a man who hadn't spoken yet, moved so fast it was a blur. He caught O'Connell's wrist, twisted it, and slammed the sergeant face first onto the chief's mahogany desk. The sound of cartilage snapping echoed in the room. "Assaulting a federal officer," Reynolds noted dryly. "Add it to the list." Suddenly the phone on Holloway's desk rang. It was the only phone in the building that was still working. Holloway stared at it. He looked at Reynolds. Reynolds nodded. "Answer it." Holloway picked up the receiver, his hand shaking. "Chief Holloway." "Bob." The voice on the other end was the mayor. "I'm watching the news. CNN is outside City Hall. They have documents, Bob. They have emails between you and the cartel detailing protection payments. What have you done? Mr. Mayor, it's a setup. You're fired, Bob," the mayor screamed. "I've already named an interim chief. Surrender your badge. And Bob, don't call me." The line went dead. Holloway dropped the phone. He slumped into his chair, looking at O'Connell, who was whimpering on the desk. "It's over," Holloway whispered. "No," Reynolds said, closing his briefcase. "This is just the administrative phase. Colonel Bishop hasn't even arrived yet." The sun had set over Oak Creek, but the police station was brighter than noon. News vans from every major network had surrounded the building. The narrative had shifted violently. At 2 p.m., it was a police raid on drug ring. By 6 p.m., the headline was "Decorated War Hero Victim of Corrupt Police Shakedown." David Bishop parked his Ford F-150 right in front of the station. He didn't bring the Black Ops team this time. He didn't need guns anymore. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, a white shirt, and the lapel pin of the Medal of Honor. He stepped out of the truck. The press mob surged forward, microphones thrust in his face. "Mr. Bishop, is it true you were Delta Force? Mr. Bishop, are you suing the city? Colonel, what do you have to say to Chief Holloway?" David stopped. He looked into the cameras. He didn't smile. He looked like a statue of judgment. "I served this country for 25 years. David said, his voice deep and resonating without shouting. "I fought enemies who wanted to destroy our way of life. I never expected to find the same enemy wearing a badge in my own hometown. What happened today wasn't law enforcement. It was piracy. And piracy has consequences." He turned and walked up the steps. The officers guarding the doormen who hadn't been part of the raid parted like the Red Sea. They saluted him. It was an instinctive reaction to the way he carried himself and the sheer weight of the ribbon on his lapel. David walked into the bullpen. The station was silent. Every officer froze. Reynolds met him in the hallway. "Colonel, the site is secured. The assets have been stripped. The JAG office has prepared the indictments." "Where are they?" David asked. "Interrogation room 1. Reynolds replied. "We put them all in together. Let them stew." David nodded. "Unlock it. Leave me with them." So Reynolds hesitated. "Per regulations, I can't leave you alone with prisoners." David looked at him. "Do I look like I need a weapon to handle Frank O'Connell?" Reynolds paused, then smirked. 5 minutes, Colonel." David opened the heavy steel door. The room was cramped. Holloway, O'Connell, Miller, and Paulson were handcuffed to the table. They looked like wrecks. Holloway's tie was undone, O'Connell's nose was broken and taped, and Miller was crying silently. When David entered, the air seemed to leave the room. He didn't yell. He pulled out a metal chair and sat down opposite them. He placed his hands on the table. "You broke my door," David said. We can pay for the door," Holloway stammered. "Mr. Bishop, Colonel, this is all a misunderstanding. If you had known I was dangerous, you would have picked a weaker victim," David finished for him. "That is your defense, that you only prey on the helpless." Holloway fell silent. "You took $75,000, David said, looking at O'Connell. "We gave it back," O'Connell rasped. "Your guys took it back. That money was for a scholarship fund," David said. "For the children of veterans who committed suicide. You stole from orphans, Frank." "I was following orders," O'Connell muttered, looking at Holloway. "And you," David turned to Miller. "You enjoyed it. I saw you smiling when you smashed my computer. You felt big." Miller shook his head. I was just backing up my sergeant." David stood up. He walked around the table. He stopped behind Holloway. "Do you know what ghost protocol is, Chief?" David whispered. Holloway shook his head, sweat dripping onto the metal table. "It means you don't exist," David said. "My team just scrubbed your social security number from the mainframes. We deleted your property deeds. We erased your marriage license. As far as the Commonwealth of Virginia and the United States government are concerned, Robert Holloway is a clerical error." "You can't do that," Holloway gasped. "That's illegal." "So was breaking into my office without probable cause," David replied. "But here is the difference. I have the clearance to authorize my actions. You are just a criminal." David leaned in close. "Your wife is at the grocery store right now. Her card was declined. She called the bank. They told her there is no account. She called your cell. It's disconnected. She is standing in the checkout line, humiliated, wondering why her life has dissolved." Holloway began to sob. "Please, leave her out of it." "You brought my life into this," David said coldly. "You brought my history into this. Now you live in my world." David walked back to the door. He paused his hand on the handle. "The district attorney is waiting outside. He is going to offer you a deal. If you plead guilty to federal racketeering, grand larceny, and deprivation of civil rights, you will go to federal prison for 20 years. 20 years, O'Connell shouted. "That's a life sentence." "The alternative," David said, turning back his eyes dark, "is that I release the rest of the files, the ones about the missing evidence from the homicide cases in 2018, the ones about the teenage girl you intimidated into silence Frank, the ones that will put you in general population, not as cops but as monsters." The color drained from O'Connell's face completely. He knew exactly what files David was talking about, secrets he thought were buried deep. "You have 10 minutes to decide," David said. "Prison or the truth." He opened the door and walked out. In the hallway, the district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Wells, was waiting. She looked at David. "Did they confess?" she asked. "They will," David said. "They are realizing that prison is the safest place for them right now." "Thank you, Colonel," Wells said. "We've been trying to nail Holloway for years. We just never had the evidence." "You never had the leverage," David corrected. As David walked toward the exit, his phone buzzed. It was General Banks. "David," Arthur's voice was serious. "We have a problem." "They are broken, Arthur. It's done." "No," Arthur said. "It's not. We just decrypted Holloway's private server. The cartel he was working for, it's not just a Mexican drug gang. The money trail leads back to a shell company in D.C. Holloway wasn't just a dirty cop. He was a pawn for Senator Corvus." David stopped in the middle of the police station lobby. Senator Corvus was the chairman of the Defense Appropriations Committee. a man David had clashed with years ago over black budget funding, a man with more power than the president in certain circles. "Corvus?" David asked. "Yes, and Corvus just found out you are the one dismantling his network. He sent a clean-up crew. Not lawyers, David. Mercenaries." David looked out the glass doors of the station. The media was still there. But beyond the lights in the shadows of the parking lot, he saw 3 vans pulling up. They weren't news vans. "Get the team ready, Arthur," David said, buttoning his suit jacket. "It looks like the war isn't over." "They are 5 minutes out," Arthur warned. "I'm at the police station," David said, looking back at the desk sergeant and the confused officers. "I have a building full of armed men. It's time I reminded them what their oath means." David turned back to the room full of cops, the honest ones, who had been watching in awe and fear. "Listen up," David's voice boomed, switching instantly from civilian to commander. "We have hostiles inbound, highly trained, heavily armed. They are coming to silence your chief and destroy the evidence we just found. You took an oath to protect and serve. Tonight you earn it." The Sergeant Billings stood up. He looked at David, then at the terrified rookies. He drew his weapon. "What are your orders, Colonel?" The atmosphere inside the Oak Creek Police Precinct shifted from confusion to combat readiness in seconds. David Bishop stood in the center of the bullpen, a general without an army commanding a squad of traffic cops and desk sergeants. "Kill the lights," David ordered. "They have night vision. We don't. We fight in the fatal funnels." Sergeant Billings, the old veteran who had watched the corruption rot his department for years, didn't hesitate. He flipped the master breaker. The station plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the flashing red and blue lights of the cruisers parked outside. "Who are they?" "A young female officer." Officer Kensley whispered, clutching her service pistol. Her hands were shaking. "Cleaners." David said, his voice cutting through the dark. "Private military contractors. They aren't here to arrest anyone. They are here to burn this building down with us inside to hide Senator Corvus's paper trail." Crash. The glass front doors shattered as a tear gas canister smashed through, skittering across the linoleum floor. White smoke hissed out, filling the lobby. "Gas masks!" Billings shouted. "If you don't have one wetter rag." David didn't move toward the exit. He moved toward the ceiling. He vaulted onto a desk, pushed open a ceiling tile, and pulled himself into the plenum space above the drop ceiling. He was gone. Outside, the 3 vans had deployed 12 men. They wore tactical black gas masks and body armor. No patches, no flags. They moved with the precision of a machine. The lead mercenary, a scarred South African named Kruger, spoke into his comms. "Breaches open. Flashbangs out. Eliminate all targets. Make it look like a cartel hit." The mercenaries stormed the lobby. They expected panicked police officers firing blindly. Instead, they found silence. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from the booking desk. Billings and Kensley were suppressing the entrance, using the heavy oak desk as cover. The mercenaries scattered, returning fire with suppressed carbines. The sound was deafening, the crack thump of bullets chewing into drywall and glass. "Flank them," Kruger ordered. "Go through the evidence locker." 2 mercenaries kicked open the side door leading to the evidence lockers. They moved fast, weapons raised. Above them, a ceiling tile shifted. David dropped. He didn't land like a man. He landed like a wraith. He fell directly behind the second mercenary, wrapping his arm around the man's throat in a sleeper hold while simultaneously grabbing the man's sidearm. Before the first mercenary could turn, David fired 2 shots. Thwip, thwip. The lead mercenary dropped, incapacitated by shots to the leg and shoulder. David choked the second man into unconsciousness and lowered him silently to the floor. David stripped the comms unit off the unconscious man and put the earpiece in. "Team 2, report." Kruger's voice crackled in his ear. "Team 2 is down," David whispered into the mic. "You're in my house now." There was a pause on the line. Then Kruger shouted, "It's Bishop Converge on the East Wing, frag out." In the interrogation room, Frank O'Connell and Chief Halloway were screaming. The sound of gunfire was getting closer. They were handcuffed to the table, helpless ducks in a shooting gallery. "They're going to kill us," O'Connell sobbed, yanking at the chains. "Bishop left us here to die." The door to the interrogation room flew open. O'Connell squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the bullet. "Shut up, Frank," David said. David stood in the doorway holding a captured carbine. He fired 3 rounds into the hallway behind him, suppressing a mercenary who was trying to advance. David turned and shot the chain linking O'Connell's handcuffs to the table. Sparks flew. He did the same for Halloway. "You're freeing us?" Halloway asked, stunned. "Your witnesses," David said, tossing O'Connell a spare magazine he had taken off the mercenary. "And right now your extra guns. Can you shoot, or are you only good for shaking down shopkeepers?" O'Connell looked at the magazine. He looked at David. For the first time in his life, Frank O'Connell felt a sense of shame so deep it burned. He nodded. "I can shoot." "Good. Watch the rear exit. Don't let them flank Billings." David vanished back into the smoke. The battle raged for 20 minutes. The station was being torn apart. Partitions were shredded. Computers were exploding in sparks. The honest cops were holding the line, but they were running low on ammo. Kruger's team was pushing hard, using flashbangs to disorient them. Billings took a round to the shoulder and went down. "I'm hit, fall back." "It fall." The mercenaries surged forward, sensing victory. Kruger stepped over the booking desk, raising his rifle to execute Billings. "Game over, cops," Kruger growled. Suddenly the wall behind Kruger exploded. It wasn't a bomb. It was a truck. David's Ford F-150, driven by remote command or sheer luck, smashed through the brick wall of the break room, plowing into the formation of mercenaries. And through the hole in the wall, the cavalry arrived. General Banks hadn't sent lawyers. He had sent Ghost Team 6. 4 operators in multicam gear stepped through the dust, moving with a speed that made the mercenaries look like amateurs. Double taps, controlled bursts. The room was cleared in 6 seconds. Kruger, pinned under the bumper of the Ford, reached for his pistol. David stepped out from the shadows, his suit covered in drywall dust and blood, none of it his own. He kicked the pistol away. David stood over Kruger. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "Who sent you?" David asked. Kruger spat blood. "Go to hell." David leaned down. "I've been there. I built a summer home there. Now I'm asking you one time. Who?" Kruger looked at the red laser dots from the Ghost Team rifles dancing on his chest. "Corvus," Kruger whispered. "Senator Corvus." David straightened up. He looked at Billings, who was being tended to by a medic. He looked at O'Connell and Halloway, who were cowering in the hallway, holding their unfired weapons. "Secure the scene," David told the Ghost Team leader. "And get these men a lawyer. They have a lot of testifying to do." 2 months had passed since the siege of Oak Creek, but the shockwaves were only just reaching their peak in Washington, D.C. The hearing room of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence was a cavern of mahogany and marble, designed to intimidate anyone who sat at the witness table. Today, the air inside was thick enough to choke on. Reporters from every major global news network jammed the gallery, their camera lenses trained like snipers on the 2 men at the center of the room. On one side sat Senator Julian Corvus. He was the picture of established power, silver hair perfectly coiffed, a tailored Italian suit that cost more than a police officer's yearly salary, and a smile that had charmed voters for 3 decades. He looked bored, tapping a gold pen against his notepad, as if this hearing were a minor scheduling inconvenience. On the other side sat David Bishop. David wasn't wearing the civilian suit he had worn to the police station. He was dressed in his Class A dress blues, the uniform of a full army colonel. The fabric was immaculate, the creases sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his chest that silenced the murmurs in the room. Rows of ribbons told a story of 25 years of shadow wars, bronze stars, purple hearts, and at the very top the Medal of Honor. He sat with the stillness of a statue, his hands resting calmly on the table. "Colonel Bishop," the committee chairwoman began peering over her spectacles. "You understand the gravity of this session. You are publicly accusing the chairman of the Defense Appropriations Committee of high treason, domestic terrorism, and conspiracy to commit capital murder. These are not accusations to be made lightly." "They are not accusations, Madame Chair," David said, his voice deep and resonating through the microphone system. "They are verified facts." Senator Corvus chuckled a dry, dismissive sound that echoed in the tense room. He leaned into his microphone, flashing a pitying smile at the cameras. "Madame Chair, if I may, this is nothing more than a Tom Clancy fantasy, cooked up by a disgraced retired soldier and a few dirty small-town cops trying to save their own skins. I have never met this man. I have never been to Oak Creek. This entire proceeding is a farce." David didn't flinch. He didn't look at Corvus. He signaled to his lawyer, Arthur Banks, who sat stoically beside him. Arthur placed a thick stack of bound documents on the table with a heavy thud. "The documents before you," David stated, "outline the financial architecture linking Senator Corvus to the Sinaloa cartel. For 6 years, he used the Oak Creek Police Department's civil asset forfeiture account as a laundering hub. Chief Halloway and Sergeant O'Connell were his bag men, skimming off the top while funneling millions into shell companies owned by the senator's wife. Conjecture." Corvus snapped, his boredom evaporating. "Paper trails can be forged." "Perhaps," David said, turning his head slowly to look Corvus in the eye for the first time. "But digital footprints are harder to erase, especially when you hire mercenaries who record their mission briefings for insurance." David pressed a single key on the laptop in front of him. The massive screens lining the hearing room walls flickered to life. The video was grainy, taken from a body camera worn by the mercenary leader, Kruger. The timestamp was from the night of the siege. The setting was the back of a stretch limousine. The lighting was poor, but the face of the man giving orders was unmistakable. Senator Corvus appeared on the screen holding a tumbler of scotch. His voice, amplified by the hearing room speakers, was clear and cold. "I want Bishop dead. I want the station burned to the ground. No witnesses, Kruger. Make it look like a cartel hit gone wrong. I'm paying you $3 million for a clean slate. Do not fail me." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a career ending, the sound of a titan crumbling. In the room, the real Senator Corvus stood up, knocking his heavy leather chair over with a crash. His face had drained of all color, leaving him looking like a ghost. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen. That is a deep fake. That is I generated. You cannot prove that is me. The footage has been digitally authenticated by the National Security Agency." David said, his voice cutting through Corvus's panic like a blade. "And Mr. Kruger is currently in federal custody. He cut a deal at 0800 hours this morning. He gave us everything, Senator, including the offshore account numbers you used to pay him." The doors to the chamber swung open. 4 federal marshals stepped inside, moving with grim purpose. "Senator Corvus," the lead marshal announced, "please place your hands behind your back." Corvus scrambled back, backing into the wall. "You can't touch me. I am a United States Senator. I have immunity." "Not for treason, sir," the marshal said, spinning Corvus around and slapping the cuffs on his wrists. The click of the metal echoed like a gunshot. As Corvus was led away, screaming about conspiracies and his rights, the gallery erupted into a frenzy of flashbulbs. But David didn't watch the spectacle. He simply closed his laptop, gathered his papers, and stood up. He had completed the mission. The final chapter of the story didn't happen in the marble halls of power. It happened where it all began, in the quiet industrial park of Oak Creek. It was a sunny Tuesday, the kind of day that felt ordinary in the best possible way. The Bishop Logistics warehouse had been fully repaired. The shattered glass was gone, replaced by reinforced windows. The front door was new, a heavy steel frame that stood open to the fresh air. Inside the office was humming with activity. Phones were ringing, printers were churning, and David Bishop was back at his metal desk reviewing shipping manifests for a school district supply run. He wasn't Colonel Bishop today. He was just Dave. The front door chimed, announcing a visitor. David looked up, expecting a delivery driver. Instead, he saw a prison transport van parked outside. Standing in his doorway was a federal corrections officer, and beside him was a man who looked like a ghost of his former self. It was Frank O'Connell. Gone was the cheap, straining suit. Gone was the arrogant sneer and the puffed-out chest. O'Connell was wearing a bright orange federal jumpsuit. His wrists were handcuffed to a belly chain, and his ankles were shackled. He had lost at least 30 pounds. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out by regret and fear. "Mr. Bishop," the guard said, stepping forward. "Prisoner O'Connell is being transferred to the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth today. The route took us through town. He petitioned the warden for a brief stop. Given your influence with the Department of Justice, the request was granted." David stood up slowly. He walked around the desk, stopping a few feet from the man who had tried to destroy his life. "You got 20 years, David said. It wasn't a question. I deserved it." O'Connell whispered, his voice cracking. He couldn't seem to lift his eyes from the floor. "I know that now. Why are you here, Frank?" O'Connell took a shaky breath and finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. I needed to say thank you." David raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Thank you." "In the station." O'Connell rushed the words out, as if he might run out of time. "When the shooting started, when the mercenaries breached the hallway, you had the gun. You could have left me and Halloway in that interrogation room. You could have let them kill us. Nobody would have blamed you. It would have been cleaner." O'Connell paused, swallowing hard against the lump in his throat. It would have been justice. David looked at the man in chains. He didn't see a monster anymore. He saw a broken human being who had finally been stripped of his illusions. "It would have been revenge," David corrected him, his voice soft but firm. "There is a difference, Frank. A soldier knows the difference. A police officer should too." O'Connell nodded, tears finally spilling over and tracking down his rough cheeks. "You saved my life so I could spend it in a cage. But at least I'm alive. At least my daughter can still visit me on Sundays. I get to see her grow up, even if it's through glass." He shifted his weight, the leg irons clinking together, a harsh, metallic sound in the quiet office. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bishop. For the money, for the insults, for the lies. I'm sorry for everything." David studied him for a long moment. He saw the sincerity there. It had taken rock bottom for Frank O'Connell to find his conscience, but he had found it. "Apology accepted," David said. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small sealed white envelope. He held it out to the guard. "What is this?" the guard asked, taking it suspiciously. "Put that in O'Connell's commissary account," David instructed. "It's $500. O'Connell's jaw dropped. He stared at David in total disbelief, Why, after everything I did to you. So you can buy a toothbrush, some decent soap and phone cards, David said simply. Call your daughter Frank. Tell her the truth. Don't waste the time you have left. I don't know what to say, O'Connell stammered. Be better, David said. That's all you have to say. The guard nodded respectfully to David and tugged on O'Connell's arm. Let's go. We're on a schedule. O'Connell shuffled toward the door. Before he stepped out into the sunlight that would be his last taste of freedom for 2 decades, he looked back one last time. He gave a small, awkward nod, a gesture of profound respect. David nodded back. The van doors slammed shut. The engine roared, and the vehicle pulled away, disappearing down the road. David stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the dust settle. The $75,000 had been returned with interest. He had already donated every cent to the veterans' charity. The city had paid out a massive settlement for the civil rights violations, which David had used to start a legal defense fund for other victims of civil asset forfeiture. He turned back to his office. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. He sat down at his desk and picked up his pen. He wasn't Colonel Bishop, the legend who toppled a senator. He wasn't the vigilante. He was just Dave, and he had work to do. They thought they were robbing a nobody. They thought the badge gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. But Frank O'Connell and Chief Halloway learned the hard way that you cannot judge a book by its cover, especially when that book is a classified dossier of a Special Forces commander. David Bishop proved that true power isn't about fear or intimidation. It's about integrity. It's about having the skills to destroy your enemy, but the discipline to seek justice instead. The corrupt officers lost everything: their money, their freedom, and their reputation because they underestimated the quiet man in the warehouse. Karma doesn't always come instantly, but when it comes, it hits like a freight train. What would you have done if you were in David's shoes? Would you have saved O'Connell? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. See you in the next video.